All right, what is up, guys? It is Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast, and we got a good one today. I always say it, but today is very interesting because we've never talked about this on the Helicopter Podcast before, and I think there's maybe even like a little bit of misunderstanding of this new technology that's coming kind of forefront into the helicopter industry right now. And as pilots, it feels a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit weird. But I think today's guest, Hector Xu, is going to be able to kind of better explain where the industry is moving in regards to, autonomous flying and things like that. So very excited to have this conversation today. Again, completely different from people that we've talked with in the past. And I think that's the beauty of having this platform. I get to talk to really interesting people. In this case, people that are way smarter than me, which is cool because then I get to, learn and gain knowledge. So I'm excited about that. Before we talk to Hector, though, just a quick thank you to the viewers and the listeners. You guys make this all possible. And of course, our partnership with MHM Publishing over at the Vertical Helicasts, who this podcast is brought to you by. So big shout out to Vertical Helicast. If you haven't checked it out, please do. And a big thanks to our sponsors at Bell Helicopter and Celicopter. So got that out of the way. Hector, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Really excited to be here, Halsey. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. This is I get very excited to talk to anyone really. And in some of my podcasts, I talk to people that I already know. Sometimes it's pilots that I don't know. And in this case, this is kind of a twofold because I don't necessarily know you all that well. We had talked just, briefly a couple weeks ago. And I'm just kind of not even near the level of fully understanding what you guys do at Rotor. And so I'm just, for me, it's like, man, I get to live this podcast. I'm like the first listener, right? I get to be educated on the things that you guys are doing at Rotor. So I'm not going to even try to explain what you guys are doing. I'm going to give you this platform to kind of talk about that, and we'll see where the conversation goes.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I would say we should start off by taking Rotor and what we do off the pedestal. I think it's not nearly as complicated as you might imagine. I think what we're doing is important, and it's an important next step for the industry. But yeah, I really want people, not to feel mystified. Even if they do coming in, hopefully they won't coming out. I guess the core kind of Rotor and my mission is about using autonomy and automation to make vertical flight a safer, better industry. Right. I love helicopters. I love aerospace. And what we're doing with autonomy is that we're starting in hazardous missions, kind of a subset of the use cases, which I think has seen kind of less attention from the technology world. And these are the places where we still see pilot fatalities, certainly compared to, how safe commercial aviation is, right? Aerial work hasn't achieved that safety level. And I think technology can really help us get there. And I think in the future, you hear a lot of talk today about eVTOLs and hydrogen aircraft and these those are the things I find kind of sometimes mystical with the technology. But and I think sometimes people talk about them as if helicopters can't do most of those things already. right? And yeah, I think autonomy is the way that the helicopter industry should almost fight back, or certainly show that it can be part of the future. And I think certainly uh, my message and what we do at Rotor has found increasing resonance with a helicopter industry that believes it should be part of the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you think about helicopter aviation as a whole, very little has changed, right? And some aircraft, in fact, I'm selling an aircraft right now. I think it's a 1967 Jet Ranger. You were talking about an aircraft that's 21 years older than I am. And God bless her.
Yeah,
She's still out there flying utility, 20,000 plus hours. Um, but, by and large, what's kind of changed technology wise with helicopters is avionics. We've had some tremendous avionic upgrades in the past and recently, glass cockpits. I'm a huge fan of like a stability augmentation system on the helicopter side. I remember I was going into air medical and I was kind of thinking to myself, like, man, this helicopter has this, 2-axis SAS platform. Why do I need that? I enjoy flying.
yeah,
Like what? I don't need this autopilot. And very soon I learned that I very much enjoyed, pretty much having the SAS engaged at all times. Um, it reduced pilot workload. It allowed me to focus a little bit more on the mission at hand. A lot of air medical is, you don't know where you're going, and then all of a sudden they're telling you fly to these coordinates. So you're working, the GPS, you're working radios, you're communicating with your crew. So having like a little bit of a co-pilot in the form of the SAS was really nice. So I'm excited to kind of dive into what you guys are doing at Rotor. I watched a video the other day that you guys had posted that you had actually sent to me. So thank you for doing that. And it was pretty wild. It's if for our listeners out there, if it's all right with Hector, we can put the link to the video in the
yeah,
bio
absolutely.
of this podcast. And it's essentially showing the platform that they've created using the R22 in this case, flying unmanned. You're watching the video and you're seeing this helicopter fly, and it's like it's kind of wild because there's nobody in the cockpit. So Hector, how do you go from R22 flying without anyone in the cockpit? I mean, where does this all start? Was this some crazy dream concocted, during your time at college? What even gives you this idea that something like this would be possible? Because it's it's a pretty. I understand not to put it too big on the pedestal, but it's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I have to admit, I'm only a student pilot. I actually still haven't got my private pilot rating. So shameful admission. Let's get that
Shame,
out of the way. Yeah,
shame.
I'm sorry. Um, and uh, and my journey to like being a student pilot was what started all of this. I was in grad school at the time. I did a bunch of other cool things. Uh, so I was at grad school at MIT in Boston, and I had the fortune of working with really smart people on cool 50-year vision stuff. Like ion propulsion and electrifying commercial aviation, hydrogen propulsion, stuff like that. But I also felt like uh, I didn't I didn't get to fly. I didn't get to be closer to the real aviation, to the real industry. And so, my response to that was, yeah, I better let me learn to fly helicopters. And this was during COVID. And I think I kind of had two kind of extreme reactions. One, which was like how much I loved it and how much I loved aviation and the people in the industry and how capable these things could be. Right? I'd seen at the time Joby and Beta and their vehicles fly, and I don't think they can do a lot more than a Robinson R44 um, in many respects. And the but the other piece was I was just shocked by how little technology was on board these systems, right? And I think you're right in that, in the EMS helicopter. I don't know if you were using MVGs, whether you said you had a two-axis SAS. Um, you know, uh, they have more axes now, right? And but it's only recently that the Robinson R44, for example, has had a SAS system, which, by the way, has been extremely successful. I think last I heard, about half of them ship from the factory with that now. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think SaaS by and large, on the Robinson platform, most people that are buying new Robinson 44 or 66, why
that's
not
right.
have the SaaS?
Yep.
It's like I said, it's kind of like your second pilot. It's like your second in command,
Yeah.
and it's nice, especially like on a long cross country. You still have to have your hand there, of course, but you can kind of relax your hand a little bit. You're not having to apply all that pressure. And I think for private owners, which make up a large majority of Robinson helicopter pilots, I think that used correctly, the SaaS actually adds a layer of safety for these guys if they end up in the clouds by accident, if their workload and their saturation gets a little bit
Yeah.
too much for kind of their current ability. Again, you have kind of this assistance. So I think it's a safety layer as well. It could be a detriment as well to safety if not used correctly and if you don't fully understand some of the system. But I think by and large, as long as the pilot's educated with it, I think it's a great tool.
Yeah. 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 I want to come back to that, later, about, technology and its potential to actually remove safety, to make things less safe, or less usable. But, I'll just, finish very quickly kind of the story, which is, um, for me, the other side of things was that I was flying these kind of small, light aircraft that didn't have much technology on them, which I think really limited kind of their potential. Like I had actually a pretty harrowing, specific experience. I think maybe in every pilot's life, you get to like have a couple of these like close call incidents, um, that probably kind of change your perspective. For me, I had it very early on in my kind of piloting experience, where I was in my CFI and we'd go, um, uh, trying to get some cross country hours in. We'd go fly around the little airports around New Hampshire. And I think we'd gone for a late lunch or something, and for some reason, we were there a bit later than we had planned, out of this small airport in Bristol, New Hampshire. Um, and coming out, uh, it got dark on us, right? It was fine. It was night VFR conditions, and we were taking off. You're close to the ground. You got the landing lights you can see, and then um, you get off the ground and suddenly it's pitch dark, right? And there's mountains all around. And yeah, we had a good 30 seconds of extremely sweaty palms, and this is he's actually now our chief pilot at Rotor. This is kind of a 6'2" Brazilian guy. Nothing, he'd flown thousands of hours doing mining operations down in Brazil. Nothing gets to him. But, I think, I don't know if any of you guys have watched the 56 seconds to live video.
Yeah.
It's like the same kind of experience. You get the sweaty palms watching that, right? And you're in the Robinson cockpit. There's nothing there. There's no synthetic vision system. There's no nothing. I think we got home, but I think it wasn't lost on me or Joao, my CFI, kind of how close we were to having things go a lot worse. Um, and um, I'm not going to say, that was a eureka moment where I decided to start a company. I think, I've been wanting to build technology to make helicopters safer, more capable, uh, for a while. But I think that was kind of a real turning point to say, hey, kind of, change probably is needed if we want these tools that we know and love, to be relevant in the future, to reach the safety standards and the usability standards, that are needed for, not just for me but for my mother, to use this in her daily life, right? And that's one of the things that like really excites me about what we do at Rotor is that I think kind of both the safety and the kind of scalability component of autonomy and automation have the potential to turn helicopters, which are today, um, I think for most people, either a VIP and luxury item, luxury tool, or kind of an industrial tool, to something that's kind of part of everyone's lives. Um, it's in some senses the same kind of long term vision as the folks that are developing eVTOLs, right? But perhaps it's just a difference in approach. Where I believe that helicopters plus autonomy is the way to get to that future. Um, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, where battery technology, is unlikely to meet the needs of commercial operation.
Yeah, I mean, I had the pleasure of visiting Vermont last year and checked out Beta Air.
Yeah.
They're doing pretty cool stuff with the eVTOL, and I flew the simulator, and it was a pretty cool experience because it's fly by wire. I think is probably the right terminology to use. You make
Yep.
the input, and the computer tells you if that's good or bad, and then makes it better essentially. And so, I mean, it was very simple to fly. I told my wife when I got home about the experience, and my wife's not a helicopter pilot, not an airplane pilot. She's ridden in helicopters many times, but she's never flown a helicopter. And my comment to her was that I feel like you could have probably flown this thing. It was pretty simple cockpit, pretty simple control system. So that is kind of a neat deal. So when did you start the company? Then was this in the 2020 time frame? Because it's I guess what I'm saying is it seems like you've made it quite far already in just 3 short years.
Yeah. We actually started the company midway through 2021, and that's when I quit my research job as a scientist and decided to work on this. Um, I think one of the reasons we have, I think, two comments. One, it probably feels like we move very fast because, this is the first time you're hearing about us. Um, uh, I think one of the things I feel is important is to, do things first and then talk about it later. Right? Which is, I think, a rarer and rarer kind of approach for companies in our space. And the second is that I think I have the fortune of working with some really fantastic people um, who are passionate about the same things as I was. And there are now about 40 of us who work out of our hangar in New Hampshire, trying to make this stuff a reality.
That's pretty cool. Away from everything about it, something that I'm passionate about is entrepreneurialism and people going out and doing things and taking risks, risks of, leaving a good job to, start your own thing. I think that's pretty cool. And I think that's what moves the world forward, right? Especially in the tech space. I mean, you hear about a lot of these guys and gals that had good paying tech jobs, but had kind of a bright idea, and they decided to take a bit of a leap of faith in themselves to create something. So I think it's really
Right.
neat. Have you always had like a entrepreneurial drive? Is this something that's kind of awakened recently, or is it something that's always kind of been in your DNA?
Um, so I think actually not really. I was a scientist before this. I was excited by what I was doing in the academic world. Um, I think yeah, I think I'm a bit different from a lot of the other I think inverted commas founders out there in that um, I started I started the company because I cared about what we were doing. I wanted to get the thing done. If I if I thought anyone else was going to be able to do the same thing, I would go join their company, or do something with them. And I think, um, Roto only exists because um, there aren't really any others doing things the way we're doing it. Um, yeah, and I think there ends up being a lot of focus for one reason or another about um, with the startup world, it's become kind of this like cultural phenomenon, like pitch decks and fundraising, and and I think um, uh, I think that's not. I actually don't think that's. I think that's a lot of. There's a lot of noise there. I think the really important things, the people who really actually care about what they're doing, that actually have a mission, like making cars electric or sending rockets to space or whatever. Actually, the funding is actually a very secondary piece. The startup stuff, the company is a very secondary piece, and it's all about getting the thing flying or getting the thing produced or the actual mission. And I think to bring it back to the specific thing that we're doing, like I think it's actually really important to take pilots out of aircraft. I mean, there are those who think there's approaches to autonomy that should keep pilots kind of physically in the vehicles. But my conviction is that the better world is where we still have pilots, but they don't need to sit in the vehicles anymore, right? And I think, yeah, the thing that I think is important. We'll talk. I think we should um, kind of talk about this a bit more. Is that, well, what is the role of pilots? I think there's a future for pilots. I think we'll need more pilots than we have today. Um, I just don't think they should be sitting in this noisy, vibrating environment if we have the technology to have them be effective um, elsewhere. And I think it somewhat conflicts with this recreational pilot idea of a recreational pilot, which dominates the light aircraft in the GA world, which is like people do it because they enjoy it, right? Because they like being up in the air, because they like the process of checking their gauges and doing everything in a manual way. But I think there should be a place for professional pilots whose main focus is getting the mission done safely, whether they get the good scenery or not, right? And I think that's kind of my starting point for all of this.
No, I do want to touch on that and talk about what I think is a little bit of an elephant in the room. But first, we're just going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors over at Bell.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
All right, coming back in. So I want to talk about the pilot thing. But first, I do want to backtrack just a little bit because I appreciate one of the things that you said in regards to a startup and just kind of what I think the impression of what it takes to start a business versus really kind of probably the more reality of it. And I think that there's probably a lot of young men and women that want to start their business, but they almost maybe feel scared, like, oh, I got to go out and do all this fundraising and I have to do this and I have to do a series A and then a B. And there's all these terminologies and EBITDA, like, it can get very confusing. And for me, I started a business and it was very simple by design, right? I had an idea that I could maybe sell aircraft better than other people. And so I started a business and, I haven't raised money. I haven't done anything. I've scaled with my business with its cash flow and things like that. And so in my business, I think it's made sense to kind of keep it simple, but obviously on a business like this is, takes it takes money, right, to be able to do what you're doing. And so I'm sure fundraising has had to be kind of part of your business story. Has it been hard to get people on board of selling your dream?
Um, I think what's been really great is that for us is that I think what we're doing makes sense to a lot of people. I think just very immediately, kind of the life-saving component of it, which I think is only one of the pieces of the future, right? Like people find extremely compelling. Um, I think people are seeing um, how drones, right, consumer drones, have changed our lives. I don't want to draw the comparison too much because the technology behind it is very different. But certainly to the layperson, I think um, it's it's very intuitive and compelling. Um, that there should be changes that will happen in larger aircraft as well with the technology. Um, and I think kind of finding resonance is the thing that has helped a lot with the business end, and the fundraising, as well. Um, I think the other piece is that I think we're shipping a product soon. We're building something that was possible to build in 3 years with a bunch of very motivated people. I think that really alleviates a lot of the burdens that, for example, a Joby or an Archer would have, right? In that, if you need $1 billion or even $5 billion in 10 years, to build the thing that you want to build, then you've got to spend your whole time doing PR and fundraising. Whereas if you only need 100th of that, in a couple of years, to at least build your first minimum viable product, I think that makes kind of life a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes sense. And it seems like it's, I feel like if you are passionate about what you're doing and what you're selling, then it's not like you're selling anything, right? It's like you're just sharing the excitement of what you're doing. And so I kind of get that sense when I think about you and your business. So now to kind of address the elephant in the helicopter podcast studio right now, I very much love flying helicopters. I like the way it feels. I often tell people that flying a helicopter is almost like putting on a pair of pants. It kind of becomes an extension of one's body. And when you get to a point in helicopters, you're always learning, you're always getting better. But there is a point where it's just almost feels like you think it and the helicopter does it. And it's this really neat feeling. And I think that's one of what drew me to helicopters versus, say, flying airplanes. I have some airplane experience in the past as well, and admittedly, it got a little boring because the airplane wants to fly. It just is inherently stable and does its thing. Whereas this helicopter, you're working with it to have this outcome, and it is making noise, and your back's shaking, and it's uncomfortable sometimes. It can even be scary at some points, but still, I'm there, and it's a visceral experience that I enjoy. How do you get someone like me on board to support an aircraft that I look in and there's no pilot, there's no one there? What do you say to guys like me and probably the majority of my listeners that listen to this podcast? I think that there's obviously some excitement. We're not dumb. We know where the industry is going, right? Technology is only advancing. But what do you say to us to kind of alleviate some of our fears or maybe even misconceptions of what companies like you are doing?
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe I use a little. I don't know. Do you ride motorbikes, Halsey?
I'm smart enough not to.
Yeah,
I feel like I
but
would. I feel like I might push the envelope a little too much, and I also get scared about other people, other cars, and things like that. So I
yeah,
stay
yeah,
away
yeah,
from motorcycles, mountain
yeah,
bikes.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is evidence that I'm not smarter than you at all. Which is, I did. Um, uh, Certainly, everyone in New Hampshire has a motorbike, so I ended up getting a motorbike. And I kind of feel like there's a interesting analogy to be drawn that it's like it's a fantastic experience, right? It's like even with in fact the thrill maybe adds to it, right? To the experience of riding a motorbike.
totally.
Um, but I wouldn't commute to work on it. I wouldn't use it as my daily ride. I know some people do, but I don't think it's practical. I don't think it works on all weather. I don't think it's a good user experience beyond the thrill. And I think, you're right. What we're building at Rotor is not about the thrill. It's not going to give more thrill to the people that ride motorbikes or fly helicopters for the thrill. And I fly helicopters for the thrill. I ride motorbikes for the thrill, and I'm going to keep doing that, right? Probably only on the weekends, but I think what we're building at Rotor is for the people that want to turn their to use their helicopter as a productive tool for industry, whether it's for crop dusting or construction or cargo transport. In fact, having thrill in many of these missions, I think, certainly does not help you complete the mission more successfully. It does not help you build a more successful business, right? And I think one of the things that's maybe sometimes a bit confusing is that today, the same thing that is at times used for commercial use cases is also a recreational tool, right? And the two are blurred. And I think perhaps when you separate out the two separate goals, it makes it clearer why we're doing what we're doing. I think actually you mentioned, I can't remember whether before we started or after we did, but about Skyrise, who are building, just did an auto rotation with their kind of autonomy kit. And actually, I love what they do. Like what they do, kind of maybe at first glance looks quite similar. We both talk about autonomy, we both talk about the future of aviation. But I think their mission is all about making the recreational pilot safer. That if you don't, if you're a private pilot, it's hard to retain currency. It's hard to, it's hard to buy something less than $2 million that will fly in instrument conditions, right? It's fantastic if you can upgrade an R66, which is I think what they're doing, to have fly-by-wire, to have all of these functions, so that it can be an even more enjoyable tool, a more enjoyable, recreational tool. But I think what we're doing is the other side of it. We're not building a recreational tool. We're not going to make the piloting more enjoyable, but we are going to make the piloting much more profitable, much more productive, and much better in the dimensions that matter for someone who's trying to run a business with a helicopter. And I expect we'll see this divergence. Actually, we're seeing the divergence in cars, right? You can have robo-taxis, right, which drive themselves, take away the joy of driving, and will be these like profit centers, right, for these new operators who'll have these fleets of autonomous taxis, and we'll also have. We'll still have people who still go to the track. There'll be people who want to drive themselves around, and they'll have probably collision avoidance tools. They'll have cruise control that will help them drive in a more relaxed way, and both are really valuable for society. And we're building kind of the first of those categories.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's again, the technology. I think it happened. For me, when again. As you said earlier, you can't necessarily draw the comparison between drones and say what you're doing, but just seeing what drones are capable of doing and how quickly they've become so advanced. I mean, I have a drone and it was pretty inexpensive, and I can ride my mountain bike and it will follow me and it will do cool shots and all these amazing things. So for me, I've always, when drones came out, I kind of thought to myself, like, okay, well, we're going down a new interesting path of aviation as a whole, because things are going to start changing, and industries are always changing. And I would probably say that fixed wing airplanes, commercial aircraft, have a lot of technology in them compared to, say, like the rotor wing side of the house. And there's obviously still very much a need for airplane pilots, and so it makes sense. But I think that we're going to be in an awkward transition period for a long time, because I think that for a lot of guys flying construction or flying ag, it's kind of in their DNA. And so I understand what you're saying, but I still find that that's going to be a hurdle. But I think that you explain it well. And I'm definitely curious on the feedback that we'll get here on the podcast. So if you're listening, reach out to us. Tell us what you think about kind of this future of helicopters, because I think it's going to be, things are going to start looking very different. So I'm definitely curious to see. Innovation is how we move society forward. And I love the idea of safety. I've been in the helicopter business for, call it, since I was 18, 19 years old. I'm 35 now. I've lost a lot of friends flying helicopters. I think this past year alone, I've had 2 friends that had lost lives in helicopters. To me, that matters. To me, that's a big deal. And so I think if there's things that we can do within the industry that help prevent accidents, help prevent fatalities, then I'm all for at least hearing it out and seeing what direction that goes. So it's, again, I think it's a polarizing topic, and it's going to be, but I think it's ultimately pretty cool of what you guys are doing. So when I watched the video of your first product, viable product, this R22 that's been modified, what am I seeing? Is there someone flying the aircraft from the ground? Is it fully autonomous? What's going on? Kind of talk me through all of that.
Yeah, yeah. The So there's a pilot, Joel, the same guy who was sitting next to me when we had that near miss, is in the seat, um, and uh, and he can take over and fly stick and rudder anytime he wants. But a lot of what we're doing is trying to see, hey, how much can we do with the pilot hands off? And we do some of those are for safety reasons, just because you're never going to guarantee that you'll always have a direct radio link between uh, the, the remote pilot and the aircraft, right? So in those scenarios, the aircraft needs to really be able to make its own decisions, and land safely. It's a bit like the Garmin Autoland system, but for rotorcraft. Um, and then the rest of the time, it's all about reducing the pilot workload. It's about um, how can the human, who I don't think it's going to go away, um, how can the human focus on the things that only the human can do, and let the computer do the things that the computer's good at and can do consistently, right? Um, and the certainly also in the flight testing environment, right? There's obviously, a lot of, hey, we've got this new software, these new flight control laws that we're testing. So there's going to be a lot of kind of back and forth with the pilot in command there, um, uh, to take over if the software is doing anything that we don't expect it to do. But
So
sorry, just very quickly, I think one thing to note is of that we do things reasonably differently from many of the other people developing autonomy. Is that, consistent with my conviction that, you know in operation we don't need to put the human in the dangerous hot seat. That even in flight testing, we don't need to put the human in the seat. So the videos that you saw are not an exception. The videos that you saw are how we do these things week in, week out, which is with no pilot on board.
yeah, it's pretty wild, and yeah, talking about like watching the auto rotation video of that company. I was kind of thinking in my head, like, man, I don't want to be on that helicopter right now, like testing,
Yeah, yeah.
testing out
They
this
put two
new.
people.
They
They put
do,
two
yeah.
people in there. I'm surprised they didn't have some passengers in the back as well.
Yeah. I'm not throwing shade, but that was kind of
Yeah,
my first thought of like, man, I don't really want to be the test pilot of that. Even when we were at Beta Air, very cool machine. We were there with the test pilot, met with him for a few hours. Great guy. But again, in my head, I'm thinking like, man, I don't know if I want his job necessarily, uh, because there's still a lot of unknowns. But um, yeah, I mean, it's cool to see your video. So like, break it down, I guess. Say, let's move to the future a little bit. Let's move forward, say 10 years from now. Let's say that I'm an ag operator. Is the hope that, say, an ag operator can have a tool like an R44 platform? They go into an app or they go into a software, they map out the field, press the green button, and the helicopter does the mission. Uh, is it, or are they going to have to constantly kind of be able to talk to the computer to tell the computer what to do, or is it how user friendly is this going to be for future operators?
Yeah. I think the short answer is very friendly. Yeah, of course I'd say that. I don't want to caveat with saying we're working with operators to build our systems or integrate our systems in a way that um, works in the real world, not just kind of in an engineer's imagination, right? I'm a very kind of empirical, experiment-based person. We we're lining up, some, uh, you know, uh, proof of concept operations with some ag operators. We're always looking for more. So if you're an ag operator, and especially if you like Robinsons, or even if you don't, um, you should reach out to us, and we'd love to work with you to integrate our tool into your operation. But kind of back to how is this going to work? So the core. Oh, I'm sorry.
While he's doing what he's doing, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors at Celicopter.
This podcast is brought to you by Celicopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Celicopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Celicopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-CELICOPTER, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@celicopter.com. Celicopter. List it, sell it, done.
All right. Well, thank you to our sponsors at Celicopter. And again, we are just chatting with Hector. We were talking about specifically kind of an ag application. And I'm a supporter of that. Ag to me is a very, it's kind of a wild west of our industry. And there's a lot of accidents every single year. In fact, on one of my podcast episodes, I forget the number, but my buddy Jackie Sanders, very accomplished pilot, flew in the military, just a ton of civilian time, ton of ag time, talks about his experience of hitting a wire, specifically what he kind of accounts for pilot fatigue. And, he's a guy that I would say is a fantastic pilot. Very surprised that he had the accident, but not surprised to hear that he's human, right? And 13 hours a day for a couple months straight can really wear at a guy or a gal. So again, what can the end user expect from operating your system in their aircraft?
Yeah, great. I just want to echo the kind of wire strike component. I think, and the I guess pilot fatigue is a factor there. I think someone told me that 70% of wire strikes accidents actually occur on wires that the pilots knew about. And yeah, which means really it's a noisy cockpit environment, or there's a lot of fatigue, and it's just very hard to hold all of those things in your attention, in your head.
Most of the pilots I've talked to, Jackie being one of them, knew about the wire. They knew it was there. They've been flying over the wire all day long, and they hit it. So I mean, it's something. It just takes one little lapse in critical thinking, and you can have a really bad day.
Yeah, absolutely. But back to the ConOps, the concept of operations, is that the operator, or kind of, for example, it's usually a multi-person operation, right? You've got the truck driver or the spray truck kind of operator, who'll refuel and fill up on the spray, whatever you're spraying, and they'll interact kind of with the aircraft, with the pilot, with a human on a radio. Actually, that human will be, a pilot employed by Rotor. we'll be providing all the piloting services, and that human will be, actually, operating a very automated tool, which is the aircraft, right? The R550X. That's the uncrewed helicopter that we're building based on the Robinson R44, and it can carry 550 kilograms of useful load, around 1,200 pounds, which is why, hence the 550, and the X just stands for experimental category. And so, there won't be a human physically there, but there'll be a pilot that they can interact with. And most of these operations, you're not exactly, shaking hands with the guy while he's flying, or he or she is flying anyway. Though, at least the operations that I've seen do a lot of hot loading, right? And the communication with the pilot is over radio anyway. So the plan is to maintain that same interface so that there's still a human. I hope actually the operators that we work with, and certainly the ones we're working with today, we get close with and we become friends with them, and our pilots will be friends with the guys who operate, and I see that will be true even once this becomes a commercial operation, right? And one of the things that we're doing is that we're moving the burden of having to employ pilots from the operators to us. It has lots of advantages for the operators in that they won't have to worry about pilot retention. They won't have to worry about, hey, what do these folks do in the wintertime? They won't have to. I think it's a real pain point. And we think that because we can put pilots to work more productively, because they won't need to travel around. They'll be tuning in via the internet to the aircraft and to the operation, that we can offer these services at a much more affordable rate than if you were to employ pilots yourself, right? And for the kind of owner operators, if you're a pilot owner and you own your own aircraft, I think hopefully it will free you up to run a great business, right? To run a great profitable business, and we'll share essentially a lot of the overheads for operators.
Yeah, so I guess right now, if I'm understanding correctly, the idea is that you, as a company, will have the pilots, right? And
That's right.
They'll be operating the aircraft. You could have an aircraft in Iowa spraying corn, but the pilot could be in New York or New Hampshire or Oregon.
Yeah, you got it. You got it, Halsey. Yeah, that's exactly. So that's in the near run, kind of the operations that we're doing today. Have a pilot also kind of in the field, right? But certainly the way that we're developing the technology and the product is, so that we don't necessarily need to have a pilot that goes out to every single field that you're spraying. And the helicopter, which comes, with a trailer and the communications equipment, will be remotely pilotable from quite a distance.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty crazy, and I guess we've seen that on the, more of the airplane, stuck wing side, where especially military applications where these UAVs are, in the war zone, and the actual pilot operator is in Washington State, so, certainly interesting. Yeah, no, that's crazy. That's, I'm very curious to continue to watch you guys, grow and expand and integrate this technology. What does the future look like for you? What is your 5-year vision? What's your 10-year vision? Where is Rotor today versus where Rotor is going to be in the future?
Yeah. I mean, actually getting the technology into the field, with the R550X, I think, is our biggest focus for the next couple of years. We're working to get these systems certified. The R550X is an experimental category system, which means, it won't be able to carry people and it won't be able to operate over populated areas, right? And We think it can be a really valuable tool, even with those limitations. But obviously, we think it can be even more powerful, um, you know, without. And I think we touched a little bit about the kind of what's the buzzword, I guess, now is this advanced air mobility vision. And I think I actually share that vision. And I think helicopters um, should be part of that future. I think um, we need to have good answers for noise. We need to have good answers for sustainability, um, uh, which, at Rotor, we want to partner with folks who are working on those areas. Um, and we obviously think autonomy is a big part of the story. And so I think, you asked 5 years, right? I think in 5 years, we can start building a lot of these things. But this is really about a 50-year story for the helicopter industry and helicopter world. And I think I find it very compelling, at least. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we've had very little innovation on the helicopter side, and advancements in avionics and things like that. But by and large, very little change, kind of in the status quo. And so this definitely seems to be kind of the beginning disruption. And I don't mean disruption in a negative connotation. Uh, just as many have disrupted other industries in the past for the for the better is kind of seems like the trajectory that you're at. So as far as like pilots that want to potentially be employed at Rotor, they're listening to the podcast right now. In fact, maybe, what does that look like? When are you guys just are you starting to look at hiring pilots to fly these vehicles, these helicopters remotely, or is it still kind of in the early stage right now?
yeah, absolutely. Reach out, careers at rotor.ai. Um, we we have more than a handful, maybe 5 or 6 pilots on staff today. Some of them are also mechanics. And we actually have we give all of our employees 20 hours of free flight training a year. I actually borrowed that from Beta,
Yeah.
who do, I think, something similar. I don't know if it's 20 hours, but yeah, I think it's one, a huge perk, but two, helps our engineers understand the systems that they're building and build things that are more relevant to real world operations. Um,
Yeah, that
so
was a cool part of going to Beta. You go into their hangar and you see the vehicle, the eVTOL that they're building, but you're almost more distracted by their training fleet. I think the guy told me at that time they
yes.
had like 17 CFIs on staff, uh, to train, pilots in airplanes and on the helicopter side. So I think it's really cool. Taking that page out of that playbook, I think is a cool incentive. And I think you're right. I think there's a productivity from the guys and the gals on your staff that aren't necessarily pilots. They might not get it, until they are able to immerse in that. So that's really cool. You said you're at 40 employees now.
Yeah, I think maybe just over now. We're hiring, we're growing the team, um, and if you're excited about what we're doing, you should reach out. Whether you think you want to you want to be part of the team, or whether you want to work with us or partner with us. We're very collaborative, and we have a huge amount to learn. Actually, Halsey, I think I have probably more to learn from you in the industry, right? Than we have to give. I think, um, and only by talking to the people um, whose livelihoods we're purporting to improve, right? Will we really be able to build the right tools for the job? And I think you're right, right? That the solution is not going to be no change, right? I think everyone understands this. So help us make sure that like what we do is the right change, right? If you have a vision for the future, talk to us about it. And we're still early enough that you get to shape what we do and shape our vision for the future.
Yeah, it's cool, and it's good to have that openness and that collaborative nature. You know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that there's probably a lot of individuals within this industry that probably have insight and things. So again, if you're interested, you want to talk with Hector, you want to talk with Hector and his team, you can check them out. Again, what's the website, Hector?
It's www.rotor.ai. So rotor.ai.
And again, like I said in the beginning of the episode, in the description, I'm going to put a link to your recent video. Again, congratulations, because it kind of seems like you said, you had kind of a low profile getting to this point of prototype. And now this is kind of your introduction to the world of who you guys are, what you guys are doing. So I'm sure it's been kind of crazy. Has it been a little bit of a different scene since you made that press release last week or earlier this week, I should say?
Yeah, definitely. Getting calls every day. Um, this is actually my first podcast, so
Nice.
probably not my last. But I think couldn't ask for a better audience and a better host.
No, well, hey, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you guys for reaching out. I know that you guys do a lot of work with Robinson Helicopters, and so I think this interview was kind of spawned from my conversation with David recently at Robinson and what they were doing with the R66 and the 44 and the 22 with the new tail design. So that was really cool, and I believe that kind of spurred this relationship. So I love that. That's if you're listening right now and you're finding enjoyment in the podcast and you think that you have something to talk about, let's talk about it. Love learning about new things, love talking with new people within the industry. That's the beauty of this podcast. Hector, thank you so much for joining. I'm very excited to continue to follow you and follow the progress. It's no small feat. Uh, Running any business is challenging, let alone a business in which you guys are doing some pretty incredible things and things that are, very technologically advanced, kind of compared to, again, the status quo of what we've seen in the industry. So kudos to you and congratulations on that. I think we'll probably have to have you back on the podcast, in a year, kind of as a catch up, see where you're at, see what's new. Because again, I think, like we saw in drones, I think the future is going to start moving pretty quickly, and it's a little bit scary, but there's also some excitement. So I'm definitely excited to see where you guys go and how things keep shaping up. Again, to our listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you to our sponsors at Bell and Celicopter, and of course to MHM and the Vertical Helicast platform. You guys help give me the voice, so I really appreciate that. Hector, thanks again for coming on. Any parting words for our listeners?
Well, thanks for listening. You've got this far, and hopefully, you know, uh, demystified, right? We talked at the beginning that the future is not as mysterious as people think, and I think my message of hey, you can be part of the future. Um, I think I think that's what I want to leave everyone with, in that what we're doing is um, to enfranchise, I guess, the helicopter industry today and make sure it has a place in the future. And um, you know, if you share that sort of vision, um, then yeah, reach out and work with us.
All right, thanks, Hector, and to our listeners, thank you. See you all later.